excuse me, what comes to me directly is about these organizations, because my feeling was that if you say in India this historicity and we don't need any kind of formal society for anything spiritual, but what happened in India in the last 100 years, one see these kind of societies have emerged. Is it a recent thing as an answer, as a competition to the colonizers?
Very good question. Okay, this is a good question. That in the last 100 years, some formal institutional societies have emerged. So there's Ramakrishna Mission, there's Chinmaya Mission, there's Sri Aurobindo Society. These kind of things have emerged. I think yes, to some extent, it is the institutional process. The idea of institution as a corporate body has been introduced to India. It is not an Indian. The joint stock company is not an Indian idea. The way businesses were organized very different in the family and in the Jati community were very differently. The idea of common property and something of a common kind, common purpose, even in business and commerce was differently organized than the Western joint stock company. And I was in a discussion with, this takes me off the spirituality point a little bit, but just to, it's related. I was in a discussion with somebody in Bangalore who's one of these very wealthy guys, and he was making the point that if you look at India's now recent success in business and commerce, a large part of it has to do with an Indian way of doing business. It's not the joint stock entity necessarily, but it's either a family or a Jati community as a sort of a whole joint entity, and how things are passed from generation to generation is quite different in that case. But the corporate, the idea of institutionalized religious lineage, I think, is new. Now, Shankaracharya set up the Mathas. You know, they are a good counterexample to all this, because they've lasted for more than 1,000 years, many centuries, and there is a very organized lineage and continuity and so on and so forth. That's a good example, but there's very few examples like that. You're absolutely right. And so, you know, I think you need the best of both. The West, for order, has also many successes. Many successes. I think the certain projects, you know, if you want to build a space shuttle or you want to build a, you know, airplane, design an airplane, you need thousands of engineers working in a very organized way, very systematic way. You cannot have everybody improvising and being creative. Military has to be organized. You cannot have a soldier who says, I'll come up with my own improvisation, like a raga in music, you know, you come up with your own idea. You cannot improvise in certain things. So I think the Western skill of large organized institutional mechanisms has its own purpose. It's a valuable purpose. And West has also created good institutions, like institutions that, you know, museums, libraries, people who've done philanthropy and built many things institutionally, schools, universities. Now, the research that needs to be done, and I don't know what the answer is, has to do with, you know, how was Harappa and Mohenjo-daro made? Because the Indus Valley civilization has a huge amount of organized systems. You know, there's drainage, there's standardized bricks, and there's weights that are standard everywhere, but there's no huge building which is sort of the emperor of symbolizing central authority. It's all very decentralized. The living quarters are all uniform, like everybody's middle class. Everybody's got a 1 or 2 bedroom place with running water, but there's no big mansion or a palace anywhere. So it's interesting that it seemed like a kind of an equal society of some sort, and without a centralized authority. And there is no, and you know, if you look at the tiles in which the nice letters have been carved and all that, they're very beautifully carved, the alphabetic script, you know. It seems, the seals, it's standardized across a huge distance. In those times, how did they make a standard? Unless the modern mind thinks that there must have been a standard control committee, okay? Or there must have been a central factory that made all of these. But there's no archaeological evidence that the bricks were made in one place and then sent everywhere. In fact, they were made separately everywhere. And these tiles were made separately. So how did they come up with a decentralized organization to produce such major things? We don't know. So maybe there is a very unusual way of organizing that existed at some point in time, which was neither today's Western idea or today's Indian idea, but something else that was lost.
I'm happy to hear finally that there is something positive in the West, because Sri Aurobindo, Swami Vivekananda, all the major yogis want exactly the synthesis of the West and the East at the highest. But what I must say, the kind of description that you have given of India and of the West doesn't correspond to the experience that I have. I understand that living in the USA since so long, obviously this has influenced you, and this is the kind of perception. And as I myself go a lot through internet, in fact I'm really frightened when I see certain things. And when I see the evangelical movement, the Christian movement in the USA, and other things that the Pope is doing and so on. But parallel to this, there has always been a totally different tradition, highly heretical, and I was one of them, because I was brought up for 10 years with Catholic nuns. But I always consider them the first yogis of my life, because usually you speak on Christianity in general, but you don't analyze, and I also watched the video with on the interview with Mark Tully and the debate between the two of you.
Yes.
I should say that I seen only half an hour of that, but I fully agree with this position. And one thing he reproached to you is, first of all, the absolutism of your categorization, and also not taking enough into account the Catholic aspect, which is totally different. Because the Catholic aspect, first of all, has an extreme left aspect, which relates directly to Jesus, and Jesus as the avatar for society, of human, of love and compassion and so on. But then there is also the aspect of the Divine Mother, which is only exclusive of the Catholic Church. And I should also tell you that not only I went around for 10 years discussing my findings on yoga with gurus and swamis, the major ones, and every time I was invited even to settle there, every time being respected as a researcher of integral yoga. But I was also very close to Big Griffith. This is where I met my husband and the father of my daughter. So all the things that you have been explaining have never been the object of my discussion with Big Griffith.
So can I answer?
Yes.
Huh?
You can also put a question.
No, my question is basically.
Send an email to you because.
Oh, no, let me summarize at least some part of the question and then answer that part, because one is her personal autobiography of a lot of respect for Indian tradition with gurus and lived experience, which is very nice and wonderful, and we really appreciate that. But the critical part is that her own experience raised in the Catholic tradition and with Bede Griffiths, who respected Vedanta. And all. I've read Bede Griffiths a lot. I've read all his books. I understand it. She and other Catholic, particularly Catholic theologies, she disagrees with my positions on Christianity, and she's also seen a part of my video with debate with Mark Tully, part of it. So let me answer that. I really wish you would see the whole video, and I would like if all of you should see that video. It's on our website. The website is the address is given in the back flap, beingdifferentbook.com.
Which video?
When you go to this,
It's on Auroville.
Yeah.
I can send you one of our people there put that.
Yeah.
It's now posted on
So just to give you a recap of that video, Mark Tully is a very pro-Hindu, pro-India BBC correspondent who's lived here, and so this video is a very important one because I'm not taking a radical evangelist. I'm taking a very liberal lover of India. And the video starts with him having read the book, and he had marked, noted and all that stuff. He read it very seriously.
This book?
Yes. And so he says that I wish you not talk about difference but how we are the same. And that's the theme that keeps coming back 4 or 5 times for the 1.5 hours. And then each time he says we are the same, I give him one non-digestible difference and ask him to accept it. which means you can be the same as me. And he said, no, I won't accept it. So I say, okay, but then it means we have to be the same on your terms. So first I tell him that is there one history and one incarnation, linear history, or are you willing to accept many avatars? And he's not willing to, if you watch the whole thing, he's not willing to accept multiple avatars. Then I tell him that the idea of Satchitanand, we all have Satchitanand, and we do not need recourse to history. And he responds by saying, but that's troublesome, there is some problem with it. He's a very nice, gentle person, but that's his position. Then I ask him if he's accepting karma and reincarnation, and he's saying, if there is some problem with that, it's a good idea, but there's some problem with that. So he has some problem with that. Then I ask him, we have this idea of Shakti as all-pervading everywhere, and he says, we have a similar idea of Holy Spirit. So I say, okay, that's a good idea. Then, all our murtis, all the deities that we worship in form, they are manifestations of Shakti. So why don't you have all these in the church? Why don't you allow us to put our murtis in your church? And he says, that will not be allowed. So I say, well, why not? Aren't we all the same? So since this is Shakti and it is the same as Holy Spirit, why won't it be allowed? He says, because then we'll be accused of polytheism. So you have to listen to the whole tape. And I really think that tape makes the point that somebody who thinks so highly of Indian Dharma and Indian spirituality, when you push him beyond a certain point, up to a point, it's fine. In a very superficial media discussion, everything looks very similar, it's fine. But when you push him to accept certain principles and tenets, he has a problem to do so. So then the conclusion of it is that we are same, but on your terms, or same on my terms. And this is a fair question. So if you want to accept reincarnation and karma, and multiple avatars and no unique historicity, and if you want to accept the Satchitanand, and we are all divine, and no sinner, and if you want to accept Shakti as an all-pervading and the ability to worship images, because we are not, there's no commandment against that for us, if you're willing to accept these principles, by all means, we'd be very happy to be the same. But if you want me to reject every one of these and then say we are the same, then you're really digesting me, and that is the problem. So I think you have to, I would really request that you look through the entire tape and not just the beginning part of it, and then you can correspond and we can exchange, we can talk about it. Regarding Bede Griffiths, I'm very familiar with Bede Griffiths. I'm very familiar that he condemns and criticizes a lot of history centrism first. He loves history centrism.
Yeah.
He says that Christianity must outgrow this exclusivity claim. And Bede Griffiths evolves over time. Bede Griffiths is Shantivanam and all, I've been, researched that. He criticizes the Christianity, he likes Advaita, he even writes about Christian Vedanta and so on. And he talks about the unity consciousness, and he's sort of doing what Hume did. He does a reinterpretation. He does all that. Now there is a person, a Westerner from Germany, who has written to me very lengthy discussions because she lived in Bede Griffiths' ashram. And she says that he would say all these right good things in front of the local people, but when we were privately together with him, he would tell us that all this is fine, but at the end of the day you have to come through Christ. So it was a very interesting kind of like, we're all together, but we can go up, we can keep going, but the final step you got to go through me,
6th and 7th.
that sort of a thing. So I think there is a subtlety. I'm writing a book specifically on Catholics, theologians, and by the way, this has been endorsed by Francis Clooney, who's a Jesuit theologian. He's a Harvard professor, and one of these videotapes that's on the network, on the internet, is my discussion with Francis Clooney. You should see that on YouTube. He endorses this book. He does not say that this is unfair. He says this is cause for Christians to rethink. He recommends Christians to read this book. So he doesn't hold this view, and he's a Jesuit, and he's a well-known guy. He is the Vatican official head of interfaith relations. So he's a big shot in the Vatican, and a professor at Harvard. And that's his view. So I would recommend that you should watch that video and see for 45 minutes his evaluation of this book. I give a talk for 35 minutes because that's what I'm allotted. He's allotted whatever time, but he goes on for 45 minutes, and he's basically praising that it's an important book. It's a milestone, he calls it, and it's something that people should read very carefully. So I wouldn't say that I've been unfair. I've talked to a lot of prominent people. Francis Clooney was one of those who read the whole manuscript. I sent it to so many people who are outside my tradition to give me critiques. And he's one of those who read this, gave me a lot of his comments. I liked his comments, I appreciated them. I made many changes where in some places, not in others. And so I think I've tried my best, but despite that, there's bound to be flaws and errors, and I'm learning, and I'm also churning, and I'm appreciative of your feedback, and I will do a better job next time. Yeah? So maybe we'll have more questions also. Yeah, please.
This is a question on my part, which I don't really know there. I'm Jewish, but not by practice. And I know of the concept of the Shekinah. Do you know that?
Yes.
Okay. Does that come close to the Hindu idea of the unity? The
Yes.
presence of the divine.
Yes.
Shekinah means the divine is present.
Yes, yes. I would say yes. The tension within Judaism, see all the traditions, even Christianity has a lot of these ideas. There's an internal tension between bloodlines, tribes, chosen people. That is history-centric. And then these Kabbalah and more mystical type things which are not history-centric. So these resources certainly exist in almost every religion. I mean, in Islam there is Sufism. So these resources exist. It's a question of which went mainstream and why, who took control of the majority of the people. And the purpose of writing the book is to help people find such things in their traditions which are non-history centric. And if Jews were to say, okay, we can be Jews, but let's go and challenge the rabbi about history centrism. And if the Christians would say that in the spirit of some of the Christians who are saying that, I work with Matthew Thomas, there's a Matthew Fox, Father Matthew Fox, and there's another one, Bishop of Newark, Bishop Spong. Bishop Spong wrote a book called Why Christianity Must Change or Die. He wrote that book and he was excommunicated for his proposals. So there is radicals, there are internal dissenters, and I'm providing sharp delineation of what they should negotiate for. And one of the important things I request people in various traditions to negotiate for, including the Hindu tradition, which does have a strain of history centrism also. This book is not for or against any one of these faiths. It's for Adhyatma Vidya and embodied knowing, and for the idea of Satchitanand, and it's against history centrism. And every person in every religion has a right to choose between them. So it is perfectly fine for Christians to say we adopt Jesus as our Ishtadevata. That's perfectly fine. Ishtadevata means chosen deity. But the idea of an Ishtadevata is non-exclusive. In other words, you respect somebody else having a different Ishtadevata. So that is the point. If Jesus is somebody's Ishtadevata and they respect other people having other Ishtadevata, and Jesus is their avatar and they respect that there are many avatars also, this could be my favorite avatar, like somebody's avatar could be Krishna. But they don't have to deny that Ram never existed. It's just that they are more into Krishna Bhakti, you see. And so I think if people of different faiths could take that message, that's what I'm hoping would happen.
In your studies and communications with people, or in your books, does anywhere esoteric Christianity come forward? I mean, I think there is no problem
Yes.
in understanding intercultural, interreligious
Yes.
exchange?
Yes. I would like to answer that. I think early Christianity, before Constantine, before Emperor Constantine did his mischief, because Emperor Constantine created the New Testament and the Nicene Creed in the 4th century. Until then, it was also very fluid. You know, the early fathers were very fluid, and there was many different ideas discussed. And you know, what happened, what was left out, we know that the Gospel of Thomas was left out, we know that it was discovered later. What are the other Gospels that were left out? So church historians like Elaine Pagels at Princeton University, she's considered an expert on early Christian history, mystical history, the Gnostics and so on. I mean, if you read those kind of ideas, then it would be fluid enough and not so history-centric. And gradually the idea that a Son of God, the Son of God has come, this is exclusive, the idea of evil and Satan and original sin, and you know, this whole thing gets solidified over a period of time, but in the early periods these ideas were not so strong. So you can find such resources. And you can also find in the later period, you can find like Meister Eckhart and various other people, you can find you know, mystics of very high quality, but somehow the authority of the church did not allow them, out of fear of, or being threatened by them, did not allow these lineages to continue. Rather than honoring them and saying, you know, you should continue doing what you're doing and spread more yoga and more of this sadhana, they were exterminated or excommunicated or marginalized or something like that. So certainly the resources have existed elsewhere. It's just that this is a fertile soil where this has been allowed to, this has been encouraged for a very long time.
Yeah, but I actually mean, in your communications with people, in your research, you never met people who had that esoteric understanding of that religion or any other religion where there could be an understanding.
Yeah, no, I do come across. Yes.
Is it very little in the West?
Yes, I come across people who have an experience of Jesus and do not have anything to do with the institution of church. I think that has been alive for a long time. So there are people like that who would happily accept the vocabulary of Ishta Devta, although they don't have that vocabulary, but the idea is similar, that this is my chosen deity, and I have my own spiritual experience, and I have no problem that somebody has all these other chosen deities. And then there is writers, there are some very serious writers like Raimundo Panikkar, tried to integrate Vedic ideas with Jesus. Raimundo Panikkar did that. This has been a tradition for a long time. This is not the only guy. Teilhard de Chardin tried to do a bit of that. There are some modern Jesuits who are doing these sort of things. And I'm looking at the influences of Hinduism and Buddhism on Catholicism. It's particularly Catholics and the Anglican Church where this type of thing happens more than the Protestant.
All the time. I feel it in my being. And I'm wondering, for example, the French, they say vive la différence. And there's a quality in that, which I experience here in Auroville as well. But when I hear distinct, for example, I feel it is more inclusive, whereas different is more exclusive. Am I right?
Okay. Well, it's a matter of how you'd want to define those English terms. In the first chapter, I have a criticism of something I call difference anxiety. Difference anxiety is the first concept I introduce, and difference anxiety is the anxiety that I'm different from someone else. Could be gender, could be race, could be religion, could be ethnicity, could be whatever. So the anxiety, the discomfort of difference is a problem which has led to many, many serious things happening. People have genocided, people have had wars, people have said, you know, I'm right, you're wrong. So then I take this difference anxiety and I say there's two kinds, superiority complex and inferiority complex. Superiority complex says, I'm okay, you are not, so you become like me and I will convert you, or I will, you know, if you're not capable of becoming like me, I'll eliminate you. The superiority complex. That results in imperialism, colonization, all of that. Then there is inferiority complex, which says, you're okay, I'm not. I want to mimic and become like you. That's a problem in India. A huge amount of difference anxiety and the absolute craving to become Western. There's a huge difference anxiety suffering of people in Delhi, people I went to college with. They think that I'm spoiling their ability, or they're becoming Western already, and I'm pointing out differences, making them self-conscious of who they are, that aspect of who they are which they have disowned. So it's become, they have a huge troubling reaction to why is this guy talking? We're supposed to drink our scotch and go on a jet somewhere and get a BMW, and we got our iPads, and doesn't he know that we are just like the Americans now? So there is that very arrogant, fast money making, some of it corrupt money, but quick overnight Westerner in India, right? So they have this complex also. So I criticize the difference anxiety from both sides, and then I propose difference with mutual respect. And a difference with mutual respect also, I say you can go further and have difference, celebration of difference. Because difference is that is the Leela. That is the Leela. Is that this is all, once you understand integral unity, then difference doesn't bother you. It's not going to be a threat or you know, problem. There's no superiority, inferiority. It's like an apple is different from an orange. Doesn't mean it's better or worse. They're different, you know. And male and female are different, but they have equal rights. Yeah. So this idea of difference with mutual respect and celebrating difference is what I put in the very first chapter. And a lot of the pages in the first chapter are dedicated to why tolerance is a problem. Tolerance is a patronizing attitude. I tolerate you means something wrong with you. Imagine your spouse saying, I tolerate you in the house. Or imagine your office colleague saying, I tolerate you to sit next to me in my office. Or you're having dinner with somebody and they say, I tolerate you to sit and have dinner next to me. I mean, what an insult. And yet, every time I go to these interfaith events or I meet someone from one of the Abrahamic religions, I ask them, what's your position on people of different faiths? They very proudly say, we tolerate you. And so I've had a lot of problems replacing the word. There was a inter-religious center being set up in Los Angeles at the McKenna Claremont University, which is a Christian-run university, very nice, very popular university, and they set up this inter-religious thing, a big center for inter-religious studies, and I was asked to be the advisor from the Hindu side, and there were advisors from various sides. And when they were doing this grand launching ceremony, everybody was giving a speech, and it was my turn, and the resolution they had drafted to launch this center said we all resolve that we are tolerating each other. So it was my turn, and every one of the speakers went and said, yeah, we Muslims tolerate everybody, we Christians tolerate everybody. Everybody said like that, and so I like to provoke and do things a little differently. So when it was my turn, I stood up and said that I request an amendment in the language, and we should replace it with mutual respect. Because when you tolerate somebody, you could say, you're going to hell, but I'll put up with you. You could say that. But when I respect you, it means you're legitimate. Respect means you're legitimate. Your way is legitimate for you. My way is legitimate for me. They may be different, but we respect each other. So it's a higher standard. And the lady who was in charge of this center called me the next day and she said, you know, you created a big commotion and it's caused a huge stir. Now, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I thought it was just a nice remark. And then a few other occasions, similar things happened. And then this idea came to me that, you know, probably a lot of them actually resist mutual respect. And you know, to me it's a simple change, but to them it's not a simple change. So I mentioned it to a Hindu Swami who is head of the Hindu organization that represents many Hindu groups. And in the year 2000, there was, United Nations had a Millennium Summit, famous Millennium Summit of all religions, was held in New York in 2000. And this Swami represented the Hindu group, and I talked to him about this, that we shouldn't accept tolerance, we should ask for mutual respect. So in the resolution, which was prepared and circulated, of course they had tolerance. So he said, and every religion was asked to give comments and suggest editing it and changing it, the working draft. So he crossed out wherever it said tolerance, he put mutual respect, and it was not acceptable. And this started a big fight. And New York Times wrote an article a few days before the conference was over that it looks like the conference will fail, because there is some language that is, he didn't give the details, but there is some irreconcilable differences, and there is the parties are fighting over language, and so on. Cardinal Ratzinger represented the Vatican at that summit, and later he became Pope Benedict, the current Pope. He was Cardinal Ratzinger at that time. And he said we can be tolerance, not mutual respect. And the Hindu guy said mutual respect, otherwise we don't sign. We don't sign. So at the very last minute, Cardinal Ratzinger accepted, and the resolution said mutual respect. And this became a very big thing. And so we have a copy of that, we put it up on the internet. And 2-3 weeks later, the Vatican issued an edict ruling saying that when we respect other religions, so they put a little conditioning, when we respect other religions, it is because there is a lot of good in them. But salvation can only come through the church. This is a very important point. Yeah, it means that, you know, I can get you to the final, but you can help. You're learning. It's not that everything is bad about you and so on. So I've had this experience in many places. So then, after 9/11, the Muslim community in the U.S. Felt that they were kind of being, there was a lot of trouble for them in the U.S., a lot of prejudice against them. So they suddenly wanted to become very close to the Hindu community because we could all stick together as South Asians. So I remember a Dallas radio station interviewing me. I visited there, and usually when I visit some place, there's some media discussions and interviews and so on. So this was a South Asian radio station, and it was run by a Pakistani. So he said, I welcome you, and we need religious harmony, and so what are your thoughts? So I told them that I come from a tradition where instead of tolerance, we like to say mutual respect, because then it's more respectful of each other. And so I gave my ideas about this. And then it was time for callers to call in. And one lady called in, who later I was told is a very prominent community leader, Muslim community leader in the Dallas area, but I didn't know who she was. She called in and she said, Rajiv ji, congratulations, welcome to Dallas. I am so happy to hear from you, from my Hindu brothers and sisters, that I fully tell you that we believe in mutual respect from the Muslim side. So I said, I'm very happy to hear that, but let me tell you that what you are expecting of my faith is I worship images, I believe in karma, I believe that the divine can be feminine, and I'm very glad that you respect all this. She hung up. Yeah. So, you have to push these things beyond just the politically correct facade.
Growing up in Germany, I was always happy that India and America didn't get on in the 60s, 70s and 80s. There was always sort of conflict, and often I was sort of on India's side. But then this tilt towards Russia, towards Soviet Union happened within India, in the political arena. How can you explain that?
Well,
I couldn't figure that one out.
Yeah, I think that was that era is called the Nehruvian era. Nehru was the prime minister.
Yeah.
It was a very unique Nehru ideology that was Fabian socialism, built on the Soviet model of centralized economy, which is very un-Indian.
Yeah.
If you really want to understand India today, you must understand the conflict between Gandhi and Nehru. And Gandhi wanted a decentralized village-based economy, Dharma, a society which was true to the Indian tradition and not a copycat of European civilization. And he had written his book in 1909 called Hindustan, which was a mandate, which was a strategic thinking about why we need independence from the British. And it was 100 years ago being different by Gandhi. This book is inspired by that. And that was Gandhi's critique of the British Empire, an Indian view of British civilization. And this is like 100 years later, kind of my views on American civilization, if you will. So Gandhi believed in a lot of these ideas of, Dharma and self-sufficiency in the villages and stuff like that. And Nehru was a product of Cambridge, and he believed in a very Eurocentric view of advancement, machinery, centralized industry, big urban centers, and that's why the villages were neglected, rural education was neglected, and that's even today. It's very sad that India invests so much in the automobile industry and not in water. What the Indian villages need is not a highway system for cars, but a highway system for water to connect the rivers, because there's either floods to some place and not enough water somewhere else. And if the billions of dollars being spent in automobile infrastructure were spent on water, it would be the bottom 50% of the people would flourish, and they would have a huge food production. It would be good for nutrition. And also a problem with the automobile-oriented economy is that it's all based on foreign oil. And trying to become Americans and having cars the way Americans do is not achievable in India, because India's population density is 10 times the United States. The United States has a lot of land. So if Indians have the same number of cars per 100 population as Americans do, the car population will be so huge that India will be a parking lot. Whole India, just people, even with 20 lanes, 50 lanes, you'll not be able to get things done. So this Nehruvian turn and rejection of Gandhi, while kind of making him an ornament of India and the father of the nation, but his ethos has not been carried out. It is more a Nehruvian idea. So India after independence is followed Nehruvian ideas, and that's what India is today.